All right, welcome to Book Club. I'm Coach Conley. Carter is my first name. I coach the linebackers at Center College. I've been vaccinated, guys, so I'll pull this down for a second. I'm lucky enough to work with some really good people, some of them you see here today. And we want to tell you about some of the favorite books that we've been discussing and going over. I don't know what order to do this in. Because I'm here with a bunch of football players, this is our defensive line, our secondary. I'll start with a book. You guys remember Coach Steckel? Coach Steckel was on our staff during the COVID year, we'll call it. Coach Steckel was the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. He coached for University of Colorado. He was the offensive coordinator for the Titans when they played in the Super Bowl. And that's where this book largely comes from. He was also the coordinator for the New England Patriots when they played in the Super Bowl. So really unique guy with a lot of information. He wrote a nice little foreword in this book. So I like this book not only because it's personal to me, because it was a gift. It's called 1 Yard Short, and it's written from the perspective of the guy that came up on the losing end in the Super Bowl. And anybody that was alive, you guys probably were too young to remember, but this was one of the most epic Super Bowls ever. And he's writing this from the perspective of not woe is me, but now what, right? So all these lessons that you guys apply daily in the combat versus adversity in your lives, this guy's writing, and his faith really comes through in this book, which is why it's one of our favorites that we'll talk about here. But this is from Les Steckel, Coach Les Steckel, 1 Yard Short. You guys remember after the Birmingham Southern game this year, Eddie George was a player on this team, on the Titans team. I'm sure will be in the Hall of Fame if he's not already. But that guy kind of emulated a lot of the lessons that Coach Steckel talks about in the book as far as, where do you go from here in life when you come up short? And how does your relationship with God play into it? And how does faith matter? Does any of this even matter in the grand scheme of things? And there's a really neat argument for why it does. And for that matter, what the heck's going on with the other side? What's going on with the other team? Does God love one side more than the other? Some of these questions that are kind of neat to ponder and think about. Coach Steckel does a good job addressing some of that in this book. Because y'all remember who the quarterback was for the other team, don't you? Anybody know? Carter Warner, like the most holy rolling guy you ever met in your life. So how do we square that? It's pretty neat stuff. Staying on the spiritual tip, you guys know I was doing that spiritual journey since Christmas until Easter. So I've kind of dug into some of these things. At your age, this is a neat concept. It's called the Theology of the Body. And this is he's been canonized as saint, but Pope John Paul II, his greatest contribution to theology in itself was the theology of the body. And after the sexual revolution, there's a lot of things that may be construed as disordered or different at this point now in society. And the theology of the body, I know if you guys are anything like when I was your age, there's a lot of emotion tied up. This book's all about sex. Let me start there. It's all about sex. It's all about lust and sex, and how do we approach something from a spiritual standpoint where everybody's looking at it as like morality and rules, and how do we look at morality as it's applied to sex, and sex as a gift. And the theology of the body is a really eye-opening, to me anyway. It's freedom. It's not trying to be a prude or being real stoic about the eros that's involved in relationships. This is like the most freeing, liberating book I've ever read, and it's obviously from it's a Catholic point of view, but just spirituality in and of itself, the theology of the body, it's a mind blower. That's a crazy one. If you want to get into some crazy sex, read this book right here. I can say that on this channel, right? It's all. This one I had to dig out, and I've started looking into this a little bit more recently. You guys, some of you met him, some of you know him, but Jamal Powell was an O-line coach here. most recently was coaching at SMU, where they always hosted us. We go out there and practice at their place. Sometimes we play in Texas. Phenomenal man, husband and father. And he passed last Tuesday. This book is called The Tunnel and the Light. Written by really the foremost expert in the world on death and dying, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you, Christopher West wrote the Theology of the Body. But The Tunnel and the Light, this author, this is a neat book because it's written, it was all live off the cuff. She's a really direct, really, she disarms a lot of people the way she communicates. But this is all from her live talks and her discussions that she does with people, and they made it into a book. And I started looking back through this because I remember the impact it had on me when I read it. The perspective that people go through, and I want to read a little excerpt from this book because it's, to me, it helps us no matter what stage of life we're in. This stuff is powerful. This is a consultation she was doing with a family, and she says it was a really nice time that she spent. She had this consultation had really incredible consequences. They called her up the next day over the telephone and said it was the most moving visit they'd ever made to the hospital. She opened the door to the hospital room, and there was this mother in a coma. Her husband was sitting this far away from the bed, right? She put her arms out real wide. It was a picture of total loneliness. Nobody was touching. Then the two little girls dashed into the room. This is deep stuff. They jumped up on mommy's bed, and with great joy and delight, they were not morbid and depressed and unhappy. They shared with mommy that they knew that she could not hug them anymore. They knew that she could hear every word that they were saying, though, and that very soon, like in a day or two, she would be free as a butterfly. That imagery is really cool because, like a lot of the children in Auschwitz and a lot of children when they're going through the death process, which is really disordered for a child to die before the parent, they would draw the imagery of butterflies, obviously escaping their physical cocoon on earth and being free, right? Something more beautiful and freeing. And the father, when they said this, in a day or two she'd be free as a butterfly, the father naturally started to sob and cry and finally hugged his children and communicated with them. The teacher, very appropriately so, left them alone for some private, intimate sharing. Now, in the United States, she was doing this speech, I think, in Stockholm, Sweden. In the United States school system, we have show and tell, right? Children bring something special to school and are allowed to share that with the class. Well, the next morning, Lori, one of the little girls, went to show and tell in school. She went up to the blackboard and drew a cocoon and a butterfly coming out of the cocoon and shared with the class of these first graders her visit to her dying mommy in the hospital, and thus gave what we considered probably the first death and dying seminar to a class of first graders by a first grader. The only one who cried through the whole session was the school teacher. The children began to open up and share with Lori experiences of deaths in their own lives, usually the death of a pet or a beloved animal, or sometimes a grandma or grandpa. Because of this one shared moment with her mother, this child was able to reach the whole class of first graders. But that's not all there is to it. What I try to share with you is that if you spend 1 hour with a child and share with her the experiences of death, it has the most incredible ramifications. Because with that 1 hour, I would not be here in Stockholm tonight. It's perspective. And that I've needed this book a lot lately because you know how we do. We all apply it to how does it affect us in our life. But it is really, really neat to see the stages that the families go through, and all of us look at it differently. But this is a good book from an expert that talks all through not just those experiences, but mystical experiences she's had. Really deep 30 years of research that she's done with people who are dying. And you want perspective on things? Talk to somebody who is in the midst of dying. It's all about living the life that you have. Living the good life so you're prepared for a great death. Tunnel in the Light, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, 1 Yard Short by our very own Coach Les Steckel, and Theology of the Body by Christopher West. some good stuff. Thank you, guys. Appreciate book club. We'll catch you next week.